You've tracked a herd for 2 days, you finally know exactly where they'll be at dawn, and everything you've eaten this week depends on getting there. Then it starts raining, not a drizzle, heavy, wind-driven, and it doesn't stop. All day, all night, into the next morning, still going. The tracks are gone, washed into mud. The river near camp is rising, and the fire your whole camp depends on is starting to lose the fight against the wet. You'd check the radar, grab a blanket, and put on Netflix. Rain, for you, is background noise, something that makes you sleepy on the couch. For most of human history, that exact same sound falling outside could kill you 3 different ways before it even stopped. Here's what those 3 ways were and what people actually did to stop them. Prehistory videos love ice ages and predators. Rain gets ignored. It's not dramatic enough for a thumbnail. No glacier, no saber-tooth cat, just water falling out of the sky for days. But rain wasn't rare. It was the weekly, sometimes monthly condition of being alive before roofs existed. And it was arguably more dangerous than almost anything with teeth. It killed fires, it caused hypothermia, it rotted stored food, it turned solid ground into the kind of mud that snaps an ankle. Water pulls heat off a human body roughly 25 times faster than air does. That's not a small gap. That's the difference between a bit chilly and dying. You don't need snow for hypothermia. You need wet skin, a light wind, and a temperature around 10 degrees Celsius. A rainy British summer, a spring night in Central Europe. That killed people. Routinely and often without warning. Let's talk about the one thing standing between your ancestors and that outcome. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. Hominins were carrying fire deep into Wonderwerk Cave, South Africa, roughly 1 million years ago. A study published this year pushed that even further back, to as much as 1.79 million years, based on burnt bone recovered 30 meters inside the cave, far past where any wildfire could reach on its own. Someone had to walk that ember in on purpose and then keep it going. That's not a campfire. That's a species that already understood fire was worth protecting long before it understood almost anything else about the world. Here's why that mattered so much in the rain. Starting a fire from nothing with wet wood, wet tinder, and cold hands is one of the hardest physical problems a human being can solve. So groups didn't treat fire as something you make when you need it. They treated it as something you never, ever let die. Embers were wrapped in slow-burning bark and moss and carried between camps for hours. Birch bark works as kindling even when it's wet because it contains a compound called betulin. When the 5,300-year-old glacier mummy known as Ötzi was found in the Alps, he was still carrying a complete backup fire kit in his belt pouch. Tinder fungus, flint, and iron pyrite for striking sparks. 5,000 years after Wonderwerk, losing your fire was still serious enough that people carried dedicated equipment to prevent it. In a storm, somebody's entire job was the fire. Not hunt, not forage, move it deeper in, shield it with hide or brush, feed it carefully. Too much smothers it, too little starves it. Split open a wet log to get at the dry wood hiding inside. That's one of the earliest divisions of labor visible in the record. Before toolmakers, before healers, there was a firekeeper, and the whole group's survival ran through that one job. Fire needs somewhere dry to burn. At Ohalo 2, a 23,000-year-old camp on the Sea of Galilee, archaeologists found 6 brush huts, not caves, huts, built on purpose, from tamarisk, willow, and oak branches layered over with smaller branches, leaves, and grass. The floor wasn't bare dirt. It was grass bedding pressed under a thin seal of clay to shed water. That's a full day's construction project, and it got repeated every single time the group moved camp, which for people following food was often. Clothing took far longer to catch up than you'd expect. At Happisburgh, England, hominins were living in genuinely cold, wet conditions with no confirmed shelters and no confirmed fire, and tools for making fitted, weatherproof clothing don't appear in Western Europe until almost 850,000 years later. Let that sink in. For most of the human story, there was no such thing as staying dry. You were just wet all the time, and you got on with it anyway. So picture it. No tracks to follow, no forage run worth the risk, no hunt. You're trapped in a hut you built with your own hands, next to a fire someone has to watch constantly for days. Here's the myth, that this meant nothing happened. Cold, bored, miserable people sitting in the dark, just waiting on the weather to turn. This is wrong. Almost completely wrong. At Blombos Cave, South Africa, a 100,000-year-old ochre workshop was found intact, Pigment ground and stored inside 2 abalone shells next to the grinding stones that made it. Not survival. Production by someone with nowhere else to be. At Sibudu Cave, also South Africa, archaeologists found grass bedding roughly 77,000 years old, layered with leaves whose oils repel insects. And the bedding was periodically burned and replaced, then rebuilt from scratch. That's not just a bed, that's housekeeping and rope. At Abri du Maras in France, a fragment of 3-ply cord made from tree bark, dated to somewhere between 41,000 and 52,000 years old, was found preserved on a Neanderthal stone tool, the oldest direct evidence of string ever recovered. In Germany, a rope-making tool carved from mammoth ivory, roughly 35,000 to 40,000 years old, was reconstructed from 15 separate pieces, 4 drilled holes, spiral grooves inside each one, built specifically to twist plant fiber into cord. Rope making by hand is slow, repetitive, and takes hours you don't have on a hunting day. It's exactly the task for someone who isn't going anywhere. Not better humans, busier ones. And it may have gone further than tools. Being trapped together with nothing else to do might have built culture itself. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner compared daytime and nighttime conversation among the Jew/Hwanzi in the Kalahari. Daytime talk was practical. Resources, logistics, complaints, who's doing what. At night, around the fire, most of that same talk turned to stories, songs, shared history. Something about firelight itself seemed to change what people were willing to say out loud. That kind of enclosed, repetitive togetherness leaves a mark. Researchers studying Australian Aboriginal oral traditions have found stories describing coastline changes from sea level rise that happened thousands of years ago, accurate enough to check against the actual geological record. That's not folklore drifting into myth. That's a storage system built entirely out of repetition and forced together time that outlasted writing by thousands of years. You've got a close cousin doing something similar with weather itself, and it's one of the more remarkable recent findings in animal cognition. A 2026 study found that chimpanzees build noticeably thicker, higher, better sheltered nests, specifically on nights that turn out cold and wet, and that their nest building lines up more closely with the coming night's weather than with the conditions at the exact moment they're building. In plain English, they seem to be reading tomorrow's storm today. Researchers are careful here. It might be humidity or air pressure cues rather than true forecasting. But if a chimpanzee can do that, it's not much of a stretch that a species watching the same sky for its life got just as good at it, or better. So what did ancient humans actually do when it rained for a week straight? Everything that mattered. They kept the one fire the whole group depended on alive. They twisted the rope that held the shelter together. They ground the pigment. They mended the bedding. They told the story that outlived every person who heard it first. Back to you. Herd gone, tracks washed into mud, sitting by a fire. Somebody has to keep alive by hand, day after day, until the sky finally lets up. You're not bored. You're not wasting the week. You're tending the one fire your whole group depends on. Twisting cord, grinding pigment, maybe telling a story your great-grandchild will still be repeating 1,000 years from now, word for word, without ever writing it down. Not primitive survival, the foundation everything else was built on. Next time it rains for a week straight and you're doom-scrolling on the couch feeling sorry for yourself, remember your ancestors did all of this with nothing but bark, bone, and fire. What do you think you'd have actually managed to make, stuck in a hut for a week with just your hands? Tell me in the comments, and if a week of rain sounds bad, wait until you hear what an Ice Age winter did to the human body. That one's next.